Welcome back for another deep dive. You've really piqued my curiosity this time around with these excerpts
Oh,
from
yeah.
Blind Watchmaker. And your notes, I'm really fascinated by not just evolution, but like Dawkins himself.
Well, it's like you crawled inside my brain and found the perfect deep dive topic.
I think it's more like you've just got great taste.
Yeah.
But seriously, cracking open the Blind Watchmaker, it's clear Dawkins isn't just explaining evolution, like he's advocating for it. He's on a mission.
Absolutely. He's like a lawyer presenting a case for Darwinism, which, for a scientist of his stature, I think is fascinating.
Yeah, and it's like, why is he so fired up about this? You've got this giant in the field passionately defending a theory most people consider settled science. Why?
Well, Dawkins argues that while Darwinism is scientifically sound, it actually faces more resistance than other theories. It's almost like there's this disconnect between how elegant the theory is and how people perceive it.
You mean like we intuitively want there to be like a designer, a creator for all of life's complexity?
It's exactly.
Dawkins argues that our brains are kind of wired for short-term thinking, so they struggle to grasp the vast timescales involved in evolution.
Okay.
And that natural inclination to see a conscious creator behind intricate design, it's something we almost have to unlearn.
So you've got two challenges there, right? Wrapping our heads around like unimaginable time frames and then challenging these deeply ingrained assumptions about how things work.
Yeah.
No wonder Dawkins felt like debating creationists was a waste of time.
He saw it as a refusal to engage with the scientific evidence with logic. And speaking of evidence, Dawkins doesn't just rail against the opposition. He lays out a compelling case for Darwinism.
And he does that by making it relatable, right? This is where that blind watchmaker analogy comes in.
Where he takes this classic creationist argument, a watch needs a watchmaker, and he kind of flips it. If a watch needs a maker, how can all of nature's complexity arise without one? And his answer,
It doesn't.
evolution by natural selection, is the blind watchmaker. Okay, so it's not about rejecting the need for an explanation at all. It's about providing a different one, a more scientifically sound explanation. And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Another thing that trips people up is the eye.
Oh, yeah.
It's so complex, so
Yeah.
seemingly perfect. They can't imagine how it could have evolved gradually.
Right. It's like, well, did it just poof into existence fully formed?
Exactly.
Dawkins says no way.
No, he uses the example of a simple cup-shaped eye. An organism that can only detect light and dark. Any improvement to that cup, a change in shape or a rudimentary lens, would be a survival advantage.
Right.
It might help them spot predators or something. And over eons, those advantages add up.
So you go from blurry light detection to the human eye just through these tiny incremental steps guided by natural selection.
Exactly. It's incredible.
It's like building a skyscraper.
Yeah.
One brick at a time, except there's no blueprint, there's no architect, it's all just this blind process.
Yep.
Exactly. And to really drive this point home about cumulative selection, Dawkins gets hands-on. He creates this computer simulation with these things called biomorphs.
Okay, yeah. This is where things got really cool for me in the book, because it's like watching digital evolution and fast forward. But explain to our listener what biomorphs are.
Okay, so imagine these digital organisms, right? They're reproducing, they're mutating in this virtual world. And in each generation, you get to be the selector. You choose which ones survive based on their traits.
Oh.
Like you might favor the ones that are more symmetrical or have a certain number of branches.
And even though you're making these seemingly simple choices, I like that one better over time they become incredibly complex and diverse.
Exactly. It's a powerful illustration of how a blind process with no foresight, no plan, can still lead to this amazing complexity.
Right.
And just when you think Dawkins has beaten the analogy to death, he hits you with another one, the combination lock.
Oh yeah, this one really clicked for me.
Because you can't just randomly jiggle a combination lock and expect it to open right, but each time you get a number right, you're one step closer.
Exactly. And it's the same with evolution. Each tiny mutation that gets selected is like getting one number closer on that combination lock. Eventually you unlock the complexity of an eye, a wing, even consciousness itself.
Mind blown. Okay, so we've talked about the why of evolution,
Yeah.
this grand vision that Dawkins is laying out. But to really understand it, I think we need to zoom in on the how, the nuts and bolts of genes and mutations.
Yeah.
And that to me is where it gets even more interesting because it feels like we're peeking behind the curtain of life itself. So I've talked about this big why of evolution, the grand vision that Dawkins lays out. But to really understand it, we gotta zoom in on the how, the nuts and bolts, the genes, the mutations.
Yeah.
And to me, this is where it gets even more mind blowing because it's like we're peeking behind the curtain of life itself.
And Dawkins being Dawkins, he has the perfect analogy to guide us. He compares genes to computer ROM. You know, those chips that hold the basic instructions for a computer.
Okay.
Like the operating system.
So each organism is running on its own unique code, passed down through the generations with these little tweaks and changes along the way?
Exactly. And those tiny changes, those mutations, they're where the real magic happens.
Okay.
They're random, they're unpredictable, and most often they have no effect or even a slightly negative effect. But every once in a while a mutation pops up that gives an organism an edge. You know, maybe it allows it to run a little faster or digest food a little more efficiently.
And that's where natural selection steps in, right? Like a quality control inspector weeding out the duds and giving the thumbs up to the beneficial mutations.
Exactly, even if those benefits are tiny.
And this is where Dawkins really tackles like a common misconception, right? The idea that like our experiences can change our genes directly. Like that whole thing about a giraffe stretching its neck to reach higher leaves and passing on a longer neck to its kids.
Right, the whole acquired traits are inherited idea.
Which Dawkins is like, nope, not how it works.
No, he uses some great analogies to explain that DNA is a one-way street. Information flows from genes to the body, not the other way around. You can lift weights all day long, but that's not going to change the genetic code you pass on to your kids.
So forget those self-help gurus who promise to change your genes through willpower. Your genes are more like a blueprint, and evolution works by making these subtle alterations to that blueprint over countless generations.
Right, it's a process.
And this brings us to another fascinating concept that Dawkins explores these evolutionary arms races. The idea that you've got predators that are constantly evolving to become better hunters and prey, that are evolving to become more elusive.
It's like this never-ending game of one-upmanship played out over millions of years, each one shaping the evolutionary trajectory of the other.
Dawkins uses that great analogy of the Red Queen from Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah, it takes all the run you can do to stay in the same place.
And that really highlights how evolution isn't just about adapting to a static environment. It's this constant dance between species.
It's a dance with millions of partners.
Exactly. And here's where I think Dawkins takes things to a whole other level. He doesn't limit this evolutionary thinking to just biology. He's like, look, these same principles, they can be applied to language, to culture.
He looked at memes, didn't he?
Yeah, and he points out how languages like species evolve over time. They diverge, they blend, new expressions emerge, old ones fade away, and just like with biological evolution, there's no conscious designer calling the shot.
Right, it's a self-organizing system.
So the next time somebody complains about kids these days ruining the English language, we can be like, hey man, language evolves. Deal with it.
It's true.
It's a living, breathing thing, just like we are.
And it's beautiful.
It is beautiful. Well, this has been incredible. You've given us so much to think about. To our listener, if you're ready to have your mind blown by the power of Darwinian evolution, The Blind Watchmaker is waiting. Go check it out. Until next time, happy exploring.